ba 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 da 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 ba 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 da da da. And he's not afraid of
Sky High is like a good cover album. It's familiar and fresh all at the same time, and it's trying to be its own thing without just riding on the coattails of what it's borrowing from. It's neat that it accomplishes that, since that very idea is its central theme and message. Don't let an institution or authority figures tell you what you are or what you have to be. Understand and recognize what came before, and then strive to reach your own potential. Yes, Sky High is one of those messagey sort of Disney movies, but it's a message I like and it doesn't get too caught up in it. It can be enjoyed in two ways: as a parody of superhero movies, cleverly playing with the familiar patterns and tropes we've seen in countless comics and superhero movies, and yes, kind of as a fluff piece, but also as a satire, delivering a pretty smart and well-conceived social commentary about the oversimplification of education and the rampant elitism we're all too familiar with in the American public school system. This is the first time I've watched this one because, honestly, I avoided it like the plague when it came out, expecting it to just be Disney's attempt at taking advantage of the cash cow that superhero movies were fast becoming in the mid-2000s. I should have given it a chance. What we have instead is a cleverly woven, tongue-in-cheek comedy set in a cartoonish comic book world that embraces superhero stereotypes as just the way the world works. It's created by people who love comic books and superheroes enough to know how to make fun of them right. Sky High is a great double entendre sort of title. It's about a high school of the same name which uses anti-grav technology to actually float in the sky. But it also echoes the film's central theme: the sky is the limit. And it's ironic because the school is in no way run that way. The film takes recurring, unspoken rules in comics that, if you really think about them, don't seem very fair, and parallels them with rules in high school that are equally unfair. It's uncanny how similar these two worlds are, and something that could have just been a Harry Potter ripoff, it quickly proves how entirely appropriate it is to meld these two worlds. In comics, sidekicks often have lame powers and are always walking in the shadow of their partner, but sometimes they're also a lot smarter. In this movie, that dynamic is law. If you don't have a cool enough power, you're stuck being a sidekick and no one pays attention to you no matter how good you are at something else. Everyone will tell you you're important to save your self-esteem, but that sentiment is thinly veiled. Ultimately, if you're the kid of superhero parents, you must go to Sky High no matter your power, or even if you have no power. And like kids in real life, who no one knows what to do with, instead of finding a way of unlocking some other potential they may have, they're just all thrown together in a room and the, quote, heroes get all the attention. So Coach Boomer makes every freshman in front of their peers show off their superpowers, and he places them in either the hero class or the sidekick class. The kids he calls heroes have the power to turn into giant rock creatures, or spit acid, or shapeshift into other people. The sidekicks can do things like glow, but only if you turn the lights off, turn into a giant ball, or turn into a guinea pig. This is an obvious criticism of the way kids are placed in real schools, where the emphasis is all on standardized tests. If you do extremely well, you're gifted. If you do really poorly, you're special. You've heard plenty of parents complain that public schools don't put nearly enough emphasis on the individual. Classrooms are crowded, and the kids that aren't cutting the mustard simply fall behind while still passing each grade, so that it's assumed that when they graduate, they've learned what they need to without making sure they're sufficiently prepared. And the flip of that are the kids for whom the work is too easy, so they coast through school, bored out of their skulls, never sufficiently challenged, like Layla in the movie, who doesn't really belong in the sidekick program but calls the system fascist and refuses to go along with it. This is all summed up nicely when Layla says, "Dividing us into groups like that, what do they think this is?" And Will responds with, "High school." So this is a really clever way to handle these issues, and the commentary is biting, yet it never gets in the way of the hilarity of the subject matter. In one scene, Mr. Medulla, the mad science teacher, gives a kid a D- on the ray gun he tries to build because, as he says, "You've confused rays with beams." He says he'd give him an F, but he doesn't want to see him in summer school. And in the very next scene, the film comments on the high school tendency of emphasizing athletics over academics, when Medulla says that Gwen might be a technopath, which makes her able to build anything with her mind, but Will's face will be the one on cereal boxes because he has super strength. It's also funny since later on we'll find that Gwen is the supervillain, and this is exactly the reason why. There's also a lot of commentary on the flawed social structure of high schools and how some kids get special attention just because of what they look like or who their parents are. When the kids first arrive, Ron Wilson, bus driver, says the bus waits for no one. But then he pulls Will aside and says if he's ever running late or wants to talk, to give him a call, because Will's parents are the commander and Jetstream, the city's most prominent superheroes. Will doesn't want this attention, and even by the school standards, he doesn't deserve it at the beginning. He doesn't even have any powers. But no one listens to him because they're all looking at the world too simplistically. Well, you're the son of the commander in Jetstream, so surely you're perfect and have incredible powers. It isn't until Coach Boomer drops a car on him, thinking he has his father's strength, and springboards him across the room, thinking he has his mother's flight, that he and his classmates realize he hasn't developed powers, and then he's of course lumped in with the sidekicks. And both hilarious and kind of sad if you really think about it are the faculty at Sky High, all chosen for their jobs based on their powers rather than their real potential. The coach is loud, the nurse has X-ray vision, Ron Wilson is the son of two superpowered parents who never developed powers, so he has to drive the bus. They've all bought into this simple hierarchy, but none of them is entirely happy about it. And as the best satires do, it takes this idea to its fullest extreme by having everyone assume you're a hero just because you have a cool power, even though several graduates turn into villains. Until you do something evil, everyone calls you a hero. As Principal Powers says when she puts Will and War and Peace in detention after they get in a fight, we can teach you how to use your powers, but what you do with them is up to you. And that's a good sentiment, but the question is, are the students really learning what they need to each reach their full potential? Or are they simply going through an outdated curriculum, just going through the motions until they get a diploma that doesn't really mean anything? I know this is a really fun movie with a lot of hilarious in-jokes, but the commentary about education really struck a chord with me. I was instantly impressed with how it turned superhero tropes on their heads. It's all about being subversive and misdirecting us. We think we know what's going to happen because this is familiar territory, and then it goes in a whole different direction, which works brilliantly the majority of the time. Our protagonist is Will Stronghold, who instead of having powers he's trying to hide from everyone and using his parents as his only confidants as you'd usually get with a teenage hero. All of this kid's friends know that he's the son of superhero parents. He hasn't developed any powers yet, and he's trying to hide that he doesn't have his powers from his parents. The idea of family and peer pressure about superpowers is a funny dynamic, and it comes off as fresh and inspired. This is a classic coming-of-age story for Will, who is likable and recognizable. He wants to live up to the family name, but he also wants to go his own way. He makes a lot of mistakes, but he always tries to do the right thing. He's always questioning the system. Why is it so important that I develop superpowers? What's wrong with the way I am? Can I just get really good at something I can already do? Why is my family supposedly better than my friends just because they're labeled sidekicks? I love the scene where Will explains his friend's powers to his father. One glows, one turns into a puddle, etc. And his father says, "They've really lowered the bar for superheroes since I went to that school." And then an exchange that plays out kind of like a kid coming out of the closet or explaining that he has no interest in taking over the family business, Will proudly announces that he's a sidekick and that he has no powers. He forces his parents to accept this, and after briefly entertaining the notion of dropping him into a vat of chemicals to see if he'll get powers, his father does accept it, as does his mother, and we like Will for taking charge of his life like that. He refuses to be locked in a pointless, never-ending arch-nemesis feud just because his father threw War and Peace's father in jail, and War and Peace hates him for it. He's in the Draco Malfoy role here, but even that's turned on its head. Will makes every effort to befriend him, or at least to be civil, and when he finally does have to fight him, it's only in self-defense. Warren is just doing what he thinks is expected of him in this wacky society. He's supposed to get revenge because his father is a supervillain. Though he's always monotone and antisocial, he eventually gets his act together and joins Will and his friends to beat the real villain, Royal Pain, at the end, and we're told before the end credits that they become best friends. And in comic book naming tradition, he kinda has to do this because his name is War and Peace. There's plenty of payoff for every major development. There's tons of foreshadowing, especially with Gwen, the villain who we don't know is the villain until the third act, where she seduces Will and manipulates her way into the secret sanctum so she can eventually steal the secret weapon the commander confiscated from Royal Pain. And there's a great subtle line when she's talking with Will and his parents where she says, "I actually have an ulterior motive for being here," which she says is to ask them to come to Homecoming, where they're being honored as Heroes of the Year. But since we later discover she's the big villain, that line actually has another meaning. And then, of course, there's her henchman, who's pretending to be her father, and then we find out that he kind of is, since he raised her from her second birth. More on that a little bit later. There's a scene toward the beginning where the commander and Jetstream take out a big robot and display the head in the secret sanctum, which seems like a throwaway show the heroes doing battle scene, but actually becomes pivotal when we find getting the head there was Royal Pain's plan all along, and that's how she's spying on the commander. At the same time, I do find the structure a little frustrating at times, as it plays out more like a season of television than a cohesive film. All the big revelations at the end feel like plants throughout interconnected episodes, because several ideas play out faster than I might have expected, most notably Will and his parents dealing with his lack of powers. About a half hour in, he develops them, after he spends a lot of time trying to cope with not having them. And I like that he makes a choice about it before he gets them. It isn't the powers that make his decision for him. That's good. He clearly decides he doesn't need powers to live a worthwhile life. But I was interested in this idea and was a little put off when he suddenly had super strength, and then at the end when he suddenly could fly. It seems a little typical. What if he never gained his powers, as the nurse warns him could happen, being the son of two superpowered parents? Wouldn't it have been more interesting and fit right in line with the themes of the film if he became a hero without any powers at all? He says toward the end that it isn't the powers that make you a hero, and that may have been even more poignant had he never gotten any. At the same time, this is a world where comic book stereotypes are law, and so it also makes sense that this silly universe rewards those who make the right choices. After all, the powerless bus driver even falls into a vat of chemicals at the end and gets powers, and everyone lives happily ever after, except for the villains, who are all in jail. Will's friends are archetypes, but clever reasons are often given for why they are so. Like Layla, who's a bona fide liberal in every way. Warren even calls her a hippie. But it makes a lot of sense. She has the power to bring plants to life, so she's extremely eco-friendly. And I love why she's a vegetarian. Her mother can talk to animals, and they tell her they don't like being eaten. I love Gwen. She seems to sincerely like Will, and it really does come off as a shock when we find out that she's just playing him, and that she's actually the villain, Royal Pain, all along. The huge plot twist in the third act makes sense. It's surprising and it's bizarre in a good way. We see her doomsday weapon in the first act, called the pacifier, and the commander has no idea what it does. This pays off nicely when we find out that it turns adults into babies, and it turned Gwen into one, so she's grown up again to get her revenge. Now she wants to turn everyone at the school into babies, and I love this commentary too. She's angry because her power was ahead of her time. No one knew what a technopath was, so she was lumped in with the sidekicks. Now she's getting her revenge basically by making everyone grow up and go through the nightmare of high school all over again. She's finally foiled by Will and his friends, who are now deemed heroes by the commander, and the point is driven home again that no one is defined simply by what they're born with. Part of the fun is looking for all the superhero in-jokes and stereotypes. I'll just list a few of my favorites. Every cliche way of superhero and alias naming is here, including starting someone's first and last name with the same letter, like Gwen Grayson. And I'm sure it's not a coincidence that her first name is taken from a major Spider-Man character, and her last is taken from a major Batman character. And also ironic and punny names that echo a physical or personality trait, like War and Peace, my favorite name, who's the son of a hero and a villain. And Will's last name, Stronghold, which not only points to his father Steve's super strength, but is also indicative of his stubbornness and the fact that he is so set in his ways. And even Will's first name, which parallels his character arc. He develops a will of his own, becomes a hero not because of his powers, but in spite of them, and chooses his sidekick friends over the heroes, some of them who act more like villains. The school nurse points out that if you're born with a power, it takes time to develop, but if you're bitten by a radioactive insect or dropped in a vat of toxic waste, you get powers immediately. The comic geek in me screamed, "That's so true." The sidekick references are especially funny, especially when Mr. Boy writes on the chalkboard, "Holy blank, blank man," and when he sets up a class period about motorcycle sidecar basics. The Commander and Jetstream have a lot of campy stuff ripped right out of Adam West Batman, including a flashing red cell phone, which the mayor calls them on, and bat poles. And the movie is filled with countless little nods to things you'll only notice on repeat viewings, like when Jetstream reminds the Commander to wear his glasses to work to protect his secret identity. It's also hilarious, by the way, how everyone acts really serious about their secret identities, but no one's really very careful about it. I mean, really, everyone going to the school knows Will's parents are the most prominent superheroes in the city, and you just know some of these kids are going to graduate and become villains. I also love all the puns, especially when Principal Powers comes over the PA system and tells the sidekicks to stop ordering hero sandwiches. And there's even a Smallville reference, unless I'm mistaken, where Will is sitting on a roof brooding and wearing Clark's iconic red jacket with the blue jeans. Finally, the stunt casting is genius. Linda Carter, TV's Wonder Woman, is the wise Dumbledore-esque Principal Powers, and she plays it completely straight. Coach Boomer is played by fan favorite Bruce Campbell, of course, a comic genius who knows just what to do with the role of takes himself too seriously, simple-minded coach, and Mr. Boy is none other than Dave Foley of Kids in the Hall fame, which was a really ironic turn for him considering that in the live-action Tick series, he played the owner of a psychiatric institution for superheroes who pretended to believe that all superheroes superheroes had a mental illness, but secretly put on Arthur's costume when no one was looking and danced around. That's right, the guy who played Mr. Boy, a guy in denial about his importance as a sidekick, also played a crackpot who wished he was a sidekick. It's hard to believe just how much substance, comedy, and commentary is packed into an hour and 40 minutes, and I enjoyed every minute of it. As I often say, parody plays by a different set of rules. Generally, it's more about how successful a commentary is being delivered on whatever is being made fun of. But we've got the best of both worlds here, a movie that also weaves a good tale and is about a character I care about. In the context of this silly universe, I buy the villain's motivations, and every character gets a moment to shine. It's only a hair below The Incredibles for me, which, being about a superhero family, it's naturally often compared to. And I'm going to give it a 3.5 out of 4. This is the first of a series of superhero parody films I'm going to be reviewing, and so next week I'm going to do Batman from 1966.
Ba, ba.